All right. Welcome to the You Heard Me podcast. And it is episode
Number 10.
number 10. And it's a very special episode. I'm going to do my double checks real quick just to make sure everything is good. Yes, we are. And we are live. And we are live. We are live. All right. So at some point, I will figure out how to get the chat box back on the screen, but we'll worry about that later. Maybe I'll have Alyssa talk about what she does again, similar to the last one. We'll get to the bottom of that in a moment. Well, as for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, this is a Q&A format podcast where we ask for questions on our Instagram at Hope Gables Canine. And you can submit your questions during the week, and we will answer those questions on our podcast. And we also do a poll so that we can hear about what you want to hear about, or we can rather talk on what you want to hear about. So we do that as well. So on our Instagram, you can find all of those things leading up to the podcast. So 10th episode, this is my beautiful wife, Alyssa. I like to always keep that constant every week. It's very important. It's very important that I acknowledge all of my beautiful wife's support. And I mean that genuinely because she really is a big reason of why I'm sitting here and why we're both sitting here. We'll talk about our journey again at some point. Yeah, we both went through a pretty significant dog training journey, and that's why both of us are here, so that we can help you through your dog training journey. So yeah. Thank you. Very nice. Okay. So, all right. Well, what we're going to do, I just checked our Instagram. The poll is still live, but as of a couple minutes ago,
I'm gonna go vote.
yes,
Oh, no?
go ahead and vote if you want. But the vote is over now. The podcast is live.
Now?
The voting is done.
It.
Voting is done. And we're going to be talking about pulling on a leash, dogs pulling on a leash, and some tips and how to tackle that. So basically for pulling
That's
on...
what I would have picked anyway.
Okay, that's what she would have picked anyway. So, all right. Well, so basically for pulling on a leash, so what you want to do for that, well, number one, there's a couple different ways you can go about it. So the first one that I always recommend for pulling on a leash is it doesn't even matter what age the dog is. Start inside. That's number one. Definitely start inside. There are less distractions. Your dog won't be as distracted. That's a big one. So I think a lot of people rush to go outside because that's where we walk our dogs on a leash. But if you start inside without distractions, your dog is going to learn more easily. And the training is going to stick versus trying to teach your dog outside. I always make a joke, which is like trying to teach your dog something new in a distracting environment is like you're studying for a test and your roommate is blasting like Nirvana in the next room, and you're not going to be able to focus, and you're probably not going to do good on your test the next day. So there are obviously better metaphors, but that's the one I'm going to stick with right now. So yeah, start inside now. If you can, find a flat wall. All right, find a wall that you can have your dog to the left of you, and just use that wall as a guide. And what you could do is you can encourage your dog. You can start obviously conditioning the heel command, but even more important than that, get your dog to learn how to follow your lead. We're not going to be able to exemplify leash pressure on our podcast, but before even getting into using leash pressure, which is a whole nother ball game, definitely have a treat pouch. If your dog is food motivated, take a couple steps, mark reward. All right, get your dog used to following your lead. Get your dog used to checking in with you. Reward for all of those behaviors. And again, you're using the wall as a guide, specifically for dogs that are very fidgety, that like to fidget around on a leash. Using that guide is very important. So those are just some high level tips. Again, getting into the nitty gritty will be hard without showcasing a video, which obviously we will have in our online courses. But really important that you start with a foundation like that, and you start conditioning what you want. And then you can get into leash pressure. So for instance, you've taught your dog how to check in with you. You've taught your dog to walk in a specific position by your side. You're rewarding them. All right. So you want to typically reward, if you're just using a leash and you're not into e-collar or anything, just reward with your left. All right. Get your dog, give your dog something to focus on. All right. And that's what you're doing. You're sculpting the position of your dog being by your side. All right, so it's a very high level tip, but I think it's a very important one because, again, I think a lot of people rush outside to start training a heel command and the dog is just super tuned out. So that's a really important piece. Now, when you've started to when your dog starts to understand that positioning, then you can get into some leash pressure work. So your dog gets a little bit too far in front of you. You apply pressure backwards. You release that pressure. That's negative reinforcement. All right. So it's still a reinforcing act. You can start adding some accountability to it with the leash. And so when you get into leash pressure, you apply pressure in the leash. And then once your dog starts going into the direction you want, make sure that you release that pressure. All right. So then you're getting into more of that balanced approach for pulling on the leash. But I would do all of this entirely inside until you feel like your dog is responsive to leash pressure, but also is responsive to the positioning that you are shaping and using that wall to help shape that behavior. And again, all these things are guides. So the leash is a guide. Walking your dog against the wall is a guide. All these things are guides, and they're all going to help you and your dog understand exactly where they need to be. After all that's done, you can start getting into corrections, using an e-collar, using a prong collar. In fact, if your dog is big and really, really just overpowering you, you might want to get into prong collar conditioning sooner than later. So just some tips there. There's a lot that goes into that. This is not full and all encompassing. There are a lot of nuances in teaching a heel command. But those are just some high level tips for that specifically. I think the last thing I'll say on just dogs pulling on a leash is at some point, yes, you're going to have to get into corrections for, your dog pulling you or your dog lunging towards a squirrel or something, but do the teaching first, condition what you want to see. And then this way, if you have to correct your dog for going against what you've taught and all the conditioning you've done inside, at least you're being fair about it. Because you've done all the repetitions that you feel you've needed to do to explain exactly what you're looking for when you say that heel command. And that heel command should have all the meaning of everything that I just described. So high level for sure. Definitely there are some nuances in that. But we will have videos on this on Hope Gables Canine Online, which will be coming very, very soon. So that's how I would address leash pulling. And some of the phases that go into that. So, yes.
Cool.
Yes. And so while we're getting into questions, I'm going to try to see if I can figure out how to get the chat box back in here. And, okay, cool. I got it.
You got it?
Yep, I got it.
Where is it?
Well, it's here. It's here. And I have to log in. Little bit of an intermission. I have to log in.
Intermission.
Yes.
Well,
Well, at least I know where to find it now. And I just want to make sure this way if somebody's asking questions. All right, great. All right, so we're good there. So we got our chat box up. This way, if we get any questions that are live, we can definitely check that out. And all right, so
Questions?
I'm gonna open up the studio here. All right, so great. Sounds good. Lovely. All right. I think we're good. Okay, cool. Sounds good. All right. So let's get into the first question.
First question.
What do we got?
What do you recommend for begging at the dinner table? My dog will sit there and stare at me. And if I give him a Kong toy, he'll finish it and come back and start whining.
All right. So, okay. So it sounds like the dog is almost getting rewarded for the begging behavior. And so basically what's happening, or at least what it seems like is happening, is to get the dog to, give you some, obviously some peace as you're eating. It sounds like the behavior is getting rewarded because you're introducing something that's valuable to the dog to get your dog to stop doing the behavior. And so what's happening is your dog is essentially holding you hostage for this. I mean, I'm not saying literally, this is not Lethal Weapon. But what I'm saying essentially is you're accidentally reinforcing that. So yes, obviously I get it. You want to eat in peace, but you're giving your dog something valuable, and then your dog's coming back to you when they finish it. And it just becomes this perpetual cycle over and over again. So, for something like this, if your dog, and I always go back to this, but if your dog knows what their boundaries are, you can get them to adhere to those boundaries. So there's too much freedom right now for your dog to do that. So, and I would even go as far as saying, why is your dog doing that? And there's no judgment here, but dogs will be more likely to beg if one of two reasons. If you're giving them something just to get them to go away, that's a big one. And then,
my dad's listening.
yes. And then, or the other one would be, I've lost my train of thought. The other one would be if you gave your dog something from the table. Now you're just making it worse. So a client of mine actually just said this to me. It's harder to take it away than not do it in the first place. All right. So really, you do not want to feed your
Just
dog.
don't do it.
Just don't do it because
Don't
it's going
give into it.
It's going to be
Don't do
much
it.
harder.
They won't
Yes.
even know
Right.
about human food if you just never give it to them.
And obviously mistakes like happen, or just life happens and things fall on the floor, and that's all going to happen, and that's fine. There's nothing you're going to do to take that away, but just be mindful of that and make sure you communicate that to your family members. Otherwise it's going to make it harder for you down the line. But certainly do not just throw things for your dog to keep their mind going when they're exhibiting a behavior like that, because you could be reinforcing that. You want to stop the behavior. No, I don't like that. And then you could redirect. And that's what nobody talks about. They don't say, you hear the word redirection a lot, but nobody says stop the behavior and then give your dog something. It's just like, you're trading. And then once you get into trading, then it's just a slippery slope. So have your dog adhere to their boundaries. No, I'm eating, it's not a punishment, but I'm asking you to go to your place. I need you to let me eat in peace. I'm not going to bribe you to do that. And there needs to be a level of understanding there. So, yeah.
Great.
Did you say your dad was listening?
No, I said I hope my dad's listening.
Okay. All right. Great.
Because he likes to feed Sadie from the table.
Oh, okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, we'll have a chat with my father-in-law on that topic at some point. What do we got? What's the second one?
Yes. How can I stop my dog from jumping on people?
All right, easy. No, correct. Or have a leash on in the house. So jumping is a question we get all the time, and it's not difficult. It's you're just stopping it. So behaviors to which you stop can be just stopped. All right. So you don't have to teach a sit. You don't have to teach it down. You don't have to teach place. You can do all those things, because I always am a fan of being proactive and getting ahead of bad behavior so that your dog starts proactively making better decisions over time. But sometimes you have to stop the behavior for your dog to make better decisions. So, your dog, the timing of the correction has to happen when your dog is in the midst of doing it. Don't correct your dog after they're done jumping, because it's not going to be clear. E-collar correction, leash pop correction, whatever you have to do, interrupt the behavior, just be done with it. It takes 2 seconds.
Great. Next question is, why shouldn't you pet a dog that is resting? We've heard from another trainer you should never pet a dog in a resting state.
Yeah. So, well, think about yourself. I mean, it's when you're resting. Well, I bother you when you're resting sometimes. I do that sometimes. But you don't bite me. But the thing is, when a dog is resting, okay. When a dog is resting, you could startle them. Okay. That's really where that's coming from. And sometimes dogs, when they're startled, and if they already have had a bite history, now you have the perfect storm scenario. Dogs typically won't just like maul you if there aren't some aggressive tendencies already there. Just startling a dog when they're resting is not going to create aggression. Now, what could happen though is if it's something that happens every day, and like there's a young kid in the family and they're doing this every time the dog is resting, then yes, maybe over time the dog would develop an aversion to that, obviously, just like if you were resting. So, but you don't know the dog. And so if you're like walking down the street and there's a dog resting, probably best that you don't pet them. You don't know the dog. You don't know the dog's history. And certainly if you have a dog in your own home, there should be some respect both ways when it comes to boundaries. So that's where that's coming from.
Okay. My dog is older, almost 12, and we recently moved into my partner's home where there's a younger dog in the mix. And no matter what we've tried, we can't get them to get along. And there have been a few fights that have broken out. We're at a loss. Is there anything that can be done, or is this a lost cause?
It's not a lost cause. It's an energy based thing. So I talk about energy a lot, and energy when it's mismatched, and we do talk about this on this podcast a lot. When you have it's been a long week. Mismatched energy. There you go. Mismatched energy. When you have mismatched energy, you can get yourself into trouble. Not you, but the dogs are going to end up butting heads because typically when dogs become older or they get older, they become more, they just don't share that same high energy. And so most dog fight households, right? Or most households that have dogs fighting in them, rather, there usually is a mismatch of energy, or there's a big difference in the age of the dogs. And usually, almost always, regardless of age, even if it's two younger dogs that are fighting, there's almost never any boundaries that the dogs understand. So there has to be an understanding that the energy, when it's not matching up, you have to work harder. And working harder means understanding that if your dog can't reciprocate that energy, then you have to proactively mediate. And that mediation is making sure that the dogs have their places in the home where they can go and decompress from each other. If there's any bad behavior going on, that all needs to be corrected. And so there are things that need to be taught, but then there are things that need to be stopped. And so that's usually the situation there. Just to give you a little bit of background, there is hope for this, but you are looking at having to be a proactive figure in that home to mitigate fights from happening. Once a fight happens and the relationship is damaged, building trust takes time. This is not something that's going to happen in a day. This is not something that's going to happen in a week. This is not something that might even happen in 6 months. This is something where you want to teach what you need them to know and understand first, and then you just incorporate it and you reinforce it and enforce what you want to see. But you have to be that figure. You have to be the leader in the home to be able to mediate what's going on. And if they don't view you as being that person, those fights are just going to continue to happen. So I just realized this is the first time I'm wearing shorts on this podcast, and my legs are like super pale, but it is what it is. Anyway, what's the next question?
They're pale.
Oh, thank you. All right.
Okay. Tips for a new puppy owner.
Tips for a new puppy owner. Well, exercise patience and understand that there are things that are not going to go away immediately, and they will go away progressively, and you're probably frustrated, but every puppy owner experiences frustration. Certainly teach what you can. Focus on a lot of lure and reward. Focus a lot on shaping behaviors. Focus and start introducing, as I've said probably 4 or 5 times now, focus on your dog's boundaries. Teach your dog how to deal with freedom a little bit at a time. Don't give them everything. Like my client said earlier, it's harder to take it away when you give it all at once. So I think the big one with puppies is too much freedom is given too soon. Start training, and also make sure you're limiting that freedom to avoid bad habits from forming. I know that was a lot of mini tips, but those are all things to remind yourself every day. If your dog is nipping, if your dog is having zoomies, or puppy rather, these are all normal behaviors for a puppy. Your puppy is not aggressive. During COVID, I got hundreds, probably more phone calls where it was the description, when I would ask for the description, is how old's your dog? And usually like the inquiry form would say my dog is aggressive. And then I'd ask the question, the dog was like 2 months old. Very, very rare, that true aggression, although, however, it's possible, but it's usually more rare. And I think what happens a lot of times is when there are first-time dog owners and they see a dog nipping, it's equated to aggression. And those two things are entirely different. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's highly unlikely. So if your dog is nipping you, it is most likely not aggression. And certainly if you're going to redirect that behavior, like the first question we got, make sure you're not accidentally rewarding the nipping. All right. So do not introduce something when your dog is doing this, because your dog is doing this and then they see this and they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to do this more. So you want to stop the bad behavior. Then you can give them something once they understand that this is not cool. How do you do that? Well, when your dog is younger, keep a leash on. This way you can use a little bit of leash pressure, a little bit of negative reinforcement. Hey, I don't want you to do that. And then you can equally, give them a frozen Kong with peanut butter, and have them hang out with that for a while. But there are going to be things that are not going to go away until your dog matures, and you can do the best you can. There is no such thing as perfection, especially when it comes to training and raising a puppy. And what you're going through is no different from anybody else. So we had to go through it when we raised Ash and Layla.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My dog is acting aggressive towards other dogs. It's unpredictable, and we can't seem to figure out what is causing it. Sometimes she's good when she meets other dogs, and other times she'll do a low growl, and one time she snapped at another dog. It's making us a bit nervous. We've tried socializing her more, but not sure how to go about it.
Well, that unpredictability is common, and we hear that a lot. Like, my dog is doing this, but it's unpredictable. So the unpredictability is coming from, there's a lack of predictability on our, well, I say our, but the unpredictability is coming from, in this specific situation, a lack of predictability when it comes to, and I don't know if this is happening on a walk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is happening just in the backyard. Wherever it's happening, though, there's a lack of predictability on the owner's side. And that's not a knock. I'm not saying that, you're necessarily doing anything wrong, but you have to sort of ask yourself, what is missing that I can be incorporating? So it's definitely not a knock on this particular individual. It's more of, think about anytime there's unpredictability in your dog's behavior, think about how you can fill those gaps with predictability on your side. So if it's a dog that's, snapping at other dogs on a leash, well, let's start setting some expectations and some understanding there. I would highly recommend, if this is happening on the leash, to not allow leash greetings to happen, because if it's unpredictable, then when it happens, it's too late. So if you do, like, let's just see, the more your dog does this behavior, the more it's going to become a higher percentage, and then it won't be so unpredictable. So, you want to match predictability to keep your dog out of trouble, out of practicing the behavior. And a lot of that is defining what those rules of the walk are. We don't allow on-leash greetings for even dogs that don't snap, because we don't want to create excitement. We don't want dogs to be pulling when we leave the home. We want it to be a nice, calm walk and a nice structured walk. And so I would highly recommend, if that is what's happening, don't just cut the leash greetings out. I think there's a big myth that, by not allowing the dog to say hi, you're creating negative thoughts in your dog's mind. No, you're not. If your dog is snapping like this, your dog is communicating that they are uncomfortable. And so what you're actually doing is you're building confidence in your dog. And so, no, you're not creating any negative thoughts. You're not creating, your dog's not going to like dogs because you're not allowing them to say hi. In fact, what you're doing is you're building your dog's confidence, and you're building trust in your relationship. So I think those are things that people miss a lot. And I would highly recommend starting to do some of those things in this situation.
Okay.
What do you think? You look very nice today.
Thank you.
I like this.
Thanks.
Always so well put together.
It's cold in here, so.
I don't even have the AC on.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if anybody experiences this at home with their significant other, but like two different temperatures, like one gravitates to one and one gravitates to the other. What am I? Am I cold? Do I gravitate to coldness?
No, you're usually cold, and I'm usually hot. But it was cold in here when I came in.
I gravitate to I want to be cold, and you want it to not be cold.
No, I don't want it to be cold, but most of the time,
right,
when I am actually hot, which takes a lot because I'm always cold,
right,
you're like, no, it's cold. And I'm like,
yeah,
it's extremely hot.
I don't think we're the only people that go through this. I think we're honestly, I think
I can't. The thing is,
well, let's ask the audience.
It's different when we're sleeping,
Okay.
right? Like I can't sleep when it's too hot.
Right.
And you're like fine with it.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, they also make those pillows that kind of like cooling pillows. I always wanted to get one of those.
But I don't think you'd like it.
Oh, I would love it.
I don't think so.
No?
Because you're like, I put the air conditioning on in the bedroom and you're like, oh, it's freezing in here.
I don't know. Well, you know what I think it is? I think it's less about that. I think is we're opposite. So if I want it to be cold, you want it to not be, and then vice versa. And I think you're just playing games with me at this point. Yeah, there it goes. There's the dirty look that I get. Anyway, all right. So enough about temperature. What do we got? What's the next question?
Okay. Why don't pet stores carry Hermspringer prong collars? Ours broke and we were in a jam and we got one of the pet store ones and it seems very large and not as effective.
Yeah, so I don't know, honestly. This is a question where
You don't know?
No, well, what I'm saying is I don't know why the pet stores don't do it. I don't work at a pet store, so I have no idea. I could always ask them, but you're never going to get a clear answer out of them anyway. I can speculate on why they don't carry them. I think it actually is not the pet store. I think it's Hermspringer. I don't think Hermspringer wants to be in pet stores. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just controlling the market. That could certainly be. Maybe they want to drive all sales through their own channels. Maybe they sell enough of them where they don't need retail. I don't know. These are all speculatory things, if that's even a word. But do not buy a prong collar from the pet store. I recommend highly against anybody doing that. And when I've walked into a home and I see a pet store prong collar, I tell my clients to literally throw it in the trash. The reason for that is the pet store prong collars are too big and they don't have anything that's actually distributing the pressure around the collar like the Hermspringers do. So on Hermspringer prong collars, the pressure is equally distributed around the entire collar. That means that every little prong that you see is getting the same amount of pressure. That's why it's a humane collar. Now, the pet store ones, all that pressure is going to like 3 prongs because there's no pressure distributor in that collar. I don't know why pet stores haven't picked up on this yet. And so, yeah, I vent and I rant about this all the time, but I don't know. Ask them. I would love if they carried Hermspringer, but they don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So that's all I have on that one. What do we got?
Will my
She's a
dog...
little slow today.
Will
10th
my...
episode.
I'm getting distracted, to be honest.
Okay,
Will my dog grow out of nipping? We can't get him to stop despite all our efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how old the dog is. We just kind of talked about this too. There's something called the puppy shell. So the puppy shell is essentially when your dog hasn't reached maturity, you're going to get things like that. You're going to get nipping. You're going to get jumping. Well, obviously mature dogs jump as well, and I'm very aware of that. But the nipping is the big one that like those razor sharp teeth that, you know, put holes in your clothing and things like that. Yes, 98% of the time, your dog is going to fully grow out of that. Okay. I used to work almost exclusively with puppies. And I would work with the puppies throughout maturity, and almost always they will grow out of the nipping behavior. Back to my earlier point, make sure that you're not accidentally rewarding it, because then it'd be more likely that it will enter into adulthood. So yeah, your dog will grow out of it, most likely, or your puppy rather.
Yeah, it's usually like nipping is usually just a puppy.
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. For the most part. I mean, I'm not going to say that older dogs won't use their mouths and stuff, but it's much less. And also chewing on things in general too, like chewing on the baseboards, chewing on furniture.
Mhm.
Those are also things that are usually left behind in puppyhood. However, if you have a very anxious dog, they're going to tear your couch apart. And if that becomes a habit and they get away with it, then that's something that can go into adulthood too. Dogs will tear things apart when they become anxious. So if you have an anxious dog, you might experience some of that. But for the most part, destructive behavior and nipping are things that kind of fade away for the most part.
Yeah, and the nipping kind of also, I feel like, stems from like the teething too.
Yeah, I mean, it's very just young dog behavior.
Mhm.
It's very. I forgot I had water here. I get very parched.
Oh.
I don't have my vitamin water, but I have regular water.
That's good. That was our last
I
question.
hate regular water.
That was our last question.
Okay. Well, let's open up our YouTube chats. and check in with our audience. Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Jen, how does the stream look? Is everything everything's going good? I always like to ask for feedback on our podcast, just to make sure everybody can hear us and nothing's lagging. It is live, so we have to contend with things like, obviously service issues and all sorts of moving parts, but hopefully you can all hear us and you can all see us and everything is running smoothly. And if that's the case, then great. All right. I'll give it a couple more seconds to see if anybody wants to chime into. Okay, we got a thumbs up. Thanks, Jen. Thank you. So Jen's gonna laugh at this, but I was gonna bring up a topic on this podcast that probably it's not something. It's something that it's an inside joke. It's something that Jen and I talked about earlier this week, but I made the decision not to bring it up. I think it was probably the better decision. But maybe it will come up on a future podcast. Jen and I talk about all sorts of things during the week. For those of you at home, Jen literally was one of our first clients, and I say this all the time. They're literally like family. We bounce things off of each other and things like that. So Jen, thank you for your support. I think she's been tuning in since the very first episode, and we can't thank them enough for all their support, and we can't thank all of you enough for all of your support as well, for chiming in, for tuning in, for responding to our Instagram, obviously polls and asking questions and things like that. So essentially, just as a reminder, just before we sign off, everybody can find us at Hope Gables Canine, at Hope Gables Canine on Instagram. If you want to submit questions, if you want to vote on what the topic is for next week, you can find us on Instagram. Please follow us, engage. You drive this podcast, and that's why we do this. So we definitely ask for feedback. We will be coming to you next week, episode 11. I can't believe we're already 11 episodes in. And so thank you all for tuning in tonight. Thank you all for joining us on your Thursday. You Heard Me podcast, episode 10, coming to you every Thursday, 8 p.m. EST live, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much, and see you then.
Sayonara.
Sayonara. All right. Bye.